the business model being the key incentive for why the tech platform, social media companies are designing algorithms to addict us and engage us to the maximum extent possible. And that is ultimately because they need our eyeballs on those screens. They need us using their apps as much as possible so they can get that data and serve us more ads. That's always been our problem analysis. This is a business model that's toxic, that's broken, that's an affront to human rights, and it's incentivizing these kind of really harmful and toxic business practices that ultimately lead to the spread of mis and disinformation, incitement to violence, hatred, and even contributing to mass offline violence and potentially genocide.
My guest is Pat de Brún, a human rights lawyer and researcher who is currently the head of Big Tech Accountability for Amnesty International and Deputy Director of Amnesty's Technology and Human Rights Program. He led the recent research that we published on the CEO Retort journal, where Amnesty International revealed how Elon Musk's X created a staggering amplification of hate during the 2024 far-right riots in Southport, England, also known as the Farage riots, and this is all by design. He has also led investigations into Facebook's role in the persecution of the Rohingya people in Myanmar and Big Tech's role in silencing human rights activists in Vietnam. He has also led several research projects on LGBTIQ rights in Cambodia, including research on trans people's lived experiences of discrimination in urban centers and a study on marriage equality and gender recognition rights, amongst many other research projects.
There was this huge hope around social media as the ultimate unprecedented tool that would enable oppressed peoples to rise up against authoritarian regimes, to have their voices heard in contexts where, the media had been heavily censored. And there is so much to that. There's so much to be kind of retained and so much to fight for, actually. And we need to free tech from big tech rather than and I think that goes beyond, to be honest, the CEOs. It goes beyond the kind of bad guys at the top, but it's the whole business model, because I fear if you replace one CEO, another will step in. As long as the business incentives are there to have these kind of data at all costs, maximizing user engagement at all costs, as long as the incentives are there in law, the companies are going to keep doing that because their shareholders will demand it. So we need not only those kind of changes at the top, but actually the regulatory changes that will enforce a different kind of social media and a different kind of internet landscape.
But it's all to do with freedom of speech, which of course they kind of conflate human rights aspect of freedom of speech with this sort of behavior. So again, to put this to bed, is this freedom of speech?
Thank you for that question, because it is plaguing these conversations at the moment. There are a lot of people who claim to be defenders and protectors of free speech who are enacting very severe harms and very politicized agendas under the guise of free speech. But
yes,
to be absolutely clear, from an international human rights perspective, based on human rights law, and that is what matters when we're talking about freedom of speech.
This is a CEO Retort podcast, the show that fearlessly goes after the difficult topics that we all need to talk about, campaigns for issues that we're all concerned about, and invites some amazing, inspiring, and remarkable guests who will help us navigate through this fragile world that we all care about. I'm Tim Al-Sheikh. Let's get after it.
You are listening to CEO Retort.
Before we start talking about the actual research that you've done that revealed some pretty astonishing things about X algorithms and the role that X has played in the summer riots, one of the things that I always like to do, especially if we're talking about Elon Musk and people like that, is to kind of shut down a few comebacks as early as possible. The defenders of Musk and so on, that they will say, oh, Amnesty International is lefty or something like that, or it's very anti-Musk, etc. So for the listeners who might not be aware of Amnesty International, what is your overall political position? But more importantly, when you conduct research like this one, how do you conduct it from the point of view of independence or unbiased approach?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Happy to give that background. I do think it's really, really important, especially the times that we're in. I mean, evidence and truth are constantly up for debate, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. A little about Amnesty. I mean, Amnesty is the largest and oldest human rights organization in the world. It was founded in the 1960s in the context of the Cold War, when groups of people started letter writing campaigns to call for the freeing of political prisoners on both sides of the Cold War. And I think that was the genesis of the kind of impartiality that is the core of Amnesty's work, that we were calling for those arbitrarily detained in the Soviet Union, but also those in fascist countries and in capitalist countries to be released as well. And from those very early days, we took a stance of neutrality, but all our findings and recommendations are based on international human rights law and standards. So none of them are arbitrary. They're all based on international law, which has been consented to and agreed by international states and written into international human rights treaties. And that very much defines how we do our research work as well. So everything is done on the basis of impartiality, independence, and non-partisanship. And in order to safeguard that independence, we don't take any money from corporations, and we don't take any money from governments either. So we're a movement actually of over 10 million people around the world who choose to be members of Amnesty, many of whom give a few pounds or a few euro or a few dollars every month to fund us. And that's what pays the salaries. And that's what makes, I think, Amnesty a powerful and impactful organization, because we could very genuinely point to this independence in our funding structure and in our approach to the work, that we don't have fear or favor, that we're not actually being bought or paid for by any government or corporate interests. So when we are analyzing an issue, whether it's someone who's been tortured or detained, or whether it's the behavior of a corporation like a tech company or a social media platform, we're doing it on the basis of international human rights standards. We have a lot of in-house expertise, lawyers and researchers who are experts in their different domains, on different countries, on different issues, on different kind of legal topics. And we come together to conduct that kind of in-depth human rights analysis. And in Amnesty Tech, where I work, we combine what are kind of traditional human rights research methods, where we talk to survivors, victims, and ask them about their experiences, and add our legal analysis to that. In addition to that, we do this kind of technical research. So we try to look under the hood of the tech to understand how the software, how the building blocks of the technology, how the design of the technology may have human rights implications. And then we're analyzing that based on international human rights standards. And that's exactly what we've done in this case as well.
And I've noticed actually you guys been doing this work for quite a while, because obviously, as you said, the organization has been around for a very long time. But when did you start putting some kind of priority or focus towards the general impact technology has on society and human rights? How long has the organization been working on that? Roughly, I mean, it doesn't have to be the exact date. This is not a history lesson, but it's just to build the context.
We've been doing this kind of work for over a decade, if not longer, but we've had a dedicated kind of program of work on technology and human rights for over a decade. I think it might be our decade anniversary this year, but don't quote me on that. And the earliest days of Amnesty Tech started out with a couple of different focus areas that included spyware. So that's a big focus of our work. We work with activists, human rights defenders, kind of those who might be targeted with repression by their governments, who are subject to targeted surveillance and spyware on their devices, on their phones. So we have a security lab that can do the technical investigations on devices to ascertain if someone is being spied upon, to expose that and then campaign for change. That's one of our longest strands of work. And then the other kind of most long-standing strand of work in Amnesty Tech is the work that I now lead, and that's around big tech accountability. But back in about from 2016 to 2018, we put out a kind of a foundational piece, taking a stance that was quite novel and new and radical at the time, that the business model of big tech companies like Meta and Google is inherently incompatible with human rights. So we looked at the overall operations, the terms and conditions of these companies, and examined their business model. What might be in other conversations, in other spaces, kind of termed as surveillance capitalism, this practice of amassing as much intimate personal data as possible to infer and learn information about us so that it can be then monetized and sold for advertising. we've taken the position that that entire business model is in conflict with the right to privacy. And because we don't meaningfully consent for that level of intrusion into our personal lives. It's an unprecedented assault on our private lives that happened more or less overnight. This architecture of surveillance was erected by Google, followed closely by Meta, whereby we're given these allegedly free tools to access the internet, to use what are now essential services. And the payoff is our privacy and our private lives. We have been concerned about this for quite some time. We've taken that position and since then followed up with a lot of investigations to look at the downstream human rights impacts of that business model. And that's what we're talking about with this research, which we'll get to later. But really the business model being the key incentive for why the tech platform, social media companies are designing algorithms to addict us and engage us to the maximum extent possible. And that is ultimately because they need our eyeballs on those screens. They need us using their apps as much as possible so they can get that data and serve us more ads. That's always been our problem analysis. This is a business model that's toxic, that's broken, that's an affront to human rights. And it's incentivizing these kind of really harmful and toxic business practices that ultimately lead to the spread of mis and disinformation, incitement to violence, hatred, and even contributing to mass offline violence and potentially genocide.
Yeah. Well, not to mention as well, on top of that, it's the mental health problems that it caused amongst hundreds of thousands of children around the world. That these are the ones that have been accounted for. We obviously don't know. And I did actually call this out as well, even before I launched this podcast, when I was saying that as we entering the AI era, we're going to be seeing a pretty aggressive data grab. So whatever we've seen thus far with social media is practically nothing compared to what we're seeing right now, to an extent that they are, pretty blatantly, in my opinion, are stealing people's work. And they try to deregulate on copyright. They try to convince governments like we have here in the UK to effectively try to, I can't remember the exact term that they use, the legal term, but effectively to ease the pressure of copyright, which is like, we never had issues with copyright. And I speak as somebody who's been involved in AI, for a very long time. And I always said, I just as a reminder to the audience, is that when I was at Google campus in the early 2010s, there was a general etiquette when it comes to copyright specifically, that you don't take other people's work and you train your model unless it's an internal experiment and you just want to try a few things out, etc. Otherwise, you have to, not because there's a law, there is no law, but out of just, decency, I suppose. Yeah, you work with the publishers and the authors, and you just say, hey, can we work together so we can use your content in our AI models, etc. And that was like a normal thing. But now they literally stepping over all of this thing, and they're saying, no, we're not interested in this. Like, we want more data. They want to have access to your. The danger for me when it comes to AI is that they are accessing your thoughts. This is for the first time, because whatever you have on social media, it's more of a facade. Some people share their real thoughts for sure, but the vast majority of people, they kind of create a character online that it's not really them. Whereas what we're seeing, and there's more studies emerging highlighting this, probably you guys have done something like that as well, where now, because people are having intimate conversations with chatbots, and these companies, the same companies you mentioned, are absolutely sucking all of this up. Now, I'm not sure what for, because I'm not sure if advertisers would be interested in that kind of thing, but you never know. But they're absolutely doing it.
Yeah, what this era of the rise of big tech over the past decade or two has shown us is that they're right. This recipe for profit is like nothing the world has ever seen before. They created, or they decided that this raw material of our private lives was something they're entitled to. And they swept in with the technology to be able to amass that before regulators or the general public could really wake up to what was going on. And we've ended up in this race to the bottom. And as you said, that is now coloring the entire development of generative AI, the AI arms race as well. There's this massive deregulation, anti-regulation push. There's these kind of false binaries that are being pushed from Silicon Valley that, if we kind of have any form of regulation, it's going to stifle innovation. It's going to hold back human progress. We know that that's nonsense, that it's not based on fact, that in fact, good regulation is good for everyone involved, except for maybe the handful of billionaire CEOs and their major shareholders who are backing these companies, but have very little regard for societal needs and good and human rights. And that's kind of the alarm we've been trying to sound for a number of years when it comes to the rise of big tech and social media and search. But certainly we're seeing the same thing play out now in the AI space. And and like you said, it's really alarming. This is enabling these companies to go deeper and deeper into our private lives and go beyond our private lives, but to all published material that exists online and simply grab it before regulators have had a chance to catch up.
Do you see any signs of regulators catching up at all?
I mean, the conversations are happening, but in terms of meaningful, effective action and enforcement, we are way behind the pace of technological development. I mean, obviously the EU has been a leader in this space. You know, in the social media space, we have the Digital Services Act. And of course, in the AI space, we have the AI Act. So there are efforts underway to seek to address some of the harms that are increasingly recognized. But those two laws are very much imperfect, particularly, I would say, the AI Act. But with the DSA, you know, what we have is a law that's it represents major progress on what existed before, because these companies developed in a complete era of self-regulation, a Wild West, where they could kind of do as they pleased and maybe apologize a few years later. Now we do have some basic frameworks to hold them to account, but the law as written, the final piece of legislation, it still didn't go nearly far enough to protect our rights. And that's because the big tech lobby is unbelievably powerful and well-resourced. And we were very much part of that battle for the DSA, along with our civil society partners across Europe. And on the other side was the big tech lobby. I mean, it's a David and Goliath battle when it comes to wealth, resourcing, and power. But there was I think a lot of victories were won despite that, because of how much civil society mobilized around the Digital Services Act. And now all you have to see is it says a lot about the DSA is the fact that big tech, the Trump administration in the US are coalescing around an effort to try and dilute, diminish, and repeal the DSA. And that is now being reported. We've got the Secretary of State in the US, you know, has advised or commanded to his diplomats in the US to make this a top priority, to repeal that law. And I think that speaks volumes about the kind of geopolitical situation we are in, the moment we are in, and where tech regulation sits within that. So some of these hard-fought gains, although imperfect, are really under severe threat right now. And unfortunately, Europe itself, the current European Commission, also has a deregulation agenda independent of pressure from the US. So we're in a real moment of risk where we have seen some progress over the last few years. That progress is really under threat. And even at that, you know, the progress that we had wasn't really sufficient to keep up with the pace of change and risk coming out of these technologies. So the overall picture is difficult. I can't sugarcoat that. The geopolitical environment is making for some tough battles in terms of protecting our rights from these technologies and corporations.
And the interesting thing is, everything that you said pretty much is irrespective of political parties in power, right? It's like whether, you know, we're talking about right-leaning governments or left-leaning governments. That problem pretty much festered under all governments, it seems. So it's like, because obviously now I'm guilty of that. Is that I'm saying that what we're going to see under the Trump administration is going to be a lot worse. You know, some people say, "Oh, yeah, because he's a Republican or because it's a MAGA movement." But actually, under Biden, I mean, Biden didn't really do anything to stop the progress of the lobbyists, basically. And you know, people complain about, for instance, like recently, I can't remember where I saw this on YouTube somewhere. I think an interview where somebody reminded some of the listeners there that one of the largest government contracts that were given to Elon Musk, we know the left hate Elon Musk, yeah, but Barack Obama actually gave him one of the biggest contracts back in the day. So, and I think that's kind of highlights the reasons why you guys are independent. I mean, that's what I'm trying to be. I always tell people that somebody might see me as more liberal. I try to not label myself as anything, but I simply see it in a very, you know, kind of black and white approach where it's human rights, it's safety. It doesn't really matter what your political colors are. I mean, you're still a human being, right? You've got the same rights. We all have the same rights. So I find it kind of astonishing that, despite all the political theater of right, left, top, bottom, the lobbyists basically are succeeding all the time. So what's the solution from the voters' point of view? Or I suppose there isn't any, is there? Really? I'm not trying to be cynical, but it's like, I'm just trying to figure out, like, if there isn't if we're talking about party politics in general, I mean, like, if it makes no difference who's in power, I mean, where are we heading?
I mean, I would say, I think I really agree with a lot of those observations, regardless of party in power, whether it's the United States or elsewhere. Over recent years, we've just seen a failure to stand up to big tech effectively and do what's needed to rein them in with the kind of meaningful regulation that would address kind of the root cause of the issues that we're seeing. We've seen steps towards regulation. We've seen some decent regulation, but nowhere near as comprehensive as has been necessary. And that has cut across political parties and interests. And I think that, to me, speaks to the power of the big tech lobby. They're deeply implicated across the aisle, across the political spectrum, and are very effective at making their case because they have the resources to do so regardless of who's in power. I mean, I do think that the new Trump administration and its relationship to big tech is something we haven't seen before, given how high level the kind of that kind of intermeshing of those forces have become, and how overt the deal is that their support is linked to the push for deregulation, not just no new regulation, but actually stripping back regulations that exist across the world. And I think that is an assault of a scale that we haven't seen before, at least not so overtly. But certainly we have been left wanting when it comes to seeing champions for protecting our rights from these companies, regardless of political party.
Yeah,
I think I would say, from Amnesty's perspective, is like we don't take any stance in favor or against any candidate or political party, but we do, and I personally really believe that this is down to people demanding things and change of their leaders. Ultimately, we would hope most political leaders are to be influenced by public opinion when it reaches a certain critical mass. And I am, even though we've painted a pretty grim picture, I think, of the prospects for positive, meaningful change right now, I am actually encouraged compared to, I think, when I started out working in this space around tech accountability. It seems like not very long ago at all that the overall public perception of big tech was very optimistic, techno-optimist, and it was very much that, I think that the harms that some of these companies were causing and contributing to were not understood widely. And I think we've seen a big change there. And although the macro political picture is kind of grim right now, I do think the building of that public understanding is an essential kind of building block for sustainable long-term change. And I do believe we're seeing that. And the likes of, the behaviors of the likes of X under Elon Musk, and they're in a way they're shooting themselves in the foot because people are disgusted by some of these actions, and it's very high profile, and I do see some cause for optimism there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in fact, one of the key messages I always like to share with the listeners is that I feel that it is down to us, the people, really to effectively rise up. I mean, it sounds a bit revolutionary, but it's true. It's like, as you said, if more people we talk to their local MPs or local senators and they say, hey, look, we're not happy with what's going on. And we've seen that, for example, in America. And again, to me, I honestly feel, as you said, with the Trump administration, this is not really a Republican Democrat thing. I mean, I think this is kind of like, I guess, the MAGA movement versus everybody, because a lot of Republicans are very much against whatever that is happening with the tech sector and Trump and so on. To be fair, so it's not. That's why I think it's important people kind of step away from the theatrics And my message is generally that, we are all effectively a bunch of frogs in a boiling water. And either we can all together get the hell out of this water, right, and demand change, or we can just stay ignorant. And the reason why I do what I do, at least with this podcast, is to raise awareness of all of these issues. Because the other thing that I was planning to talk about this a little bit later, actually, but it's the role of the media. The media aren't scrutinizing tech companies enough, in my opinion. There are a few smaller media outlets, like mine include. I'm very small, but as you said, I am actually also optimistic because I've been shouting and screaming about these things since 2014. And it's only now that people started listening, because now people are kind of coming back to Tim, you know what? You're right. Shit. Okay. So now suddenly my following is increasing. This podcast is becoming more popular, which is great. But it means that people are starting to realize that actually, no, everything that we've got out there is actually harmful. And I think it's important to emphasize that we're not saying that we need to end the tech. The tech is fine. Like you said earlier, it's the people behind the tech. They are the problem, aren't they, basically?
Exactly. I mean, I would even go further than that. I agree that the tech is not the problem, and that these are important tools that actually, from a human rights perspective, enable also the realization of human rights. I mean, internet connectivity, access to these communications platforms are now kind of essential for the realization of rights. And that's recognized, in international fora by the UN, etc. However, the business models that underpin them are not a necessary ingredient in those technologies and tools. What we have there is an extractive and exploitative business practice behind and alongside what should be and could be an invaluable tool, a tool for the spread of, human, a force for good in the world for human rights, for example. And that was the reality. That was our perception just a few short years ago. Around the time of the Arab Spring, there was this huge hope around social media as the ultimate unprecedented tool that would enable oppressed peoples to rise up against authoritarian regimes, to have their voices heard in contexts where, the media had been heavily censored. And there is so much to that. There's so much to be kind of retained and so much to fight for, actually. And we need to free tech from big tech rather than and I think that goes beyond, to be honest, the CEOs. It goes beyond the kind of bad guys at the top, but it's the whole business model, because I fear if you replace one CEO, another will step in. As long as the business incentives are there to have these kind of data at all costs, maximizing user engagement at all costs, as long as the incentives are there in law, the companies are going to keep doing that because their shareholders will demand it. So we need not only those kind of changes at the top, but actually the regulatory changes that will enforce a different kind of social media and a different kind of internet landscape.
100%. I mean, this is music to my ears, because again, I've been banging on about the same thing in here. Even I think for the last few episodes where I literally just said, hey, I think just need to abolish shareholders completely, or change the law. Because right now the law effectively says that you must prioritize shareholders at all costs. I mean, one of the reasons why I walked away from all of that, and I'm basically trying to build a company with 0 shareholders, and it's hard because the money is not there. I mean, before you could, I sound like a proper old fart now, but back in the day, like 20 years ago, you could just go down the bank next door to your house, a local bank, borrow some cash and start a business. I mean, as long as of course, you have to have a good business plan, etc. But right now, you want to start a tech startup, you have to go to investors. There's no options. There's some random grants here and there, but it's nothing. And it's very hit and miss. It's literally, it's the VC class and the investor class. And I'm not saying they're all bad. Some of them are good. I personally know some really good investors. But the reason why I walked away, because I know for a fact, if I had all of my previous companies, I walked away from all of it. But if I were the CEO of the previous companies, they would have forced me to get into the LLM's arms race, which I have absolutely no interest in. And I'd like to highlight that personal experience at Google campus and before Google, that vast majority of tech CEOs, they start with a real mission. They're not interested in taking over the world. They're not interested in any of that nonsense. But as soon as, of course, they start getting VCs, they become part of the system, things change. And I know personally, I even had one CEO, Edith Tin, that came to the podcast. She launched a company called Clue, which is she's like the mother of femtech. So she's the person that came up with the whole concept of femtech. And she basically walked away. She raised, I don't know, over $100 million worth of VC funds. And after that, she walked away. And basically because it's not her company anymore. It's a company that she started, but it's not her company, because it's like the VCs and the shareholders, the whole shebang basically started to force her into a direction that she felt, well, that's not what I want to do. But what else can she do? Because the law says her fiduciary duties as a CEO and a director is for you to follow what the shareholders want you to do. Otherwise, you're out or you're breaking the law even. So to me, as you said, I think the business model and the entire system really needs to completely be taken out, as far as I'm concerned, if we want any kind of clean tech and useful tech that actually serves people as it meant to do.
Exactly. And I think all of that speaks to the necessity of recognizing that we cannot expect these companies to do better by asking them to do better. It's not about the personal preferences of one CEO or one executive. They ultimately will not survive in their roles unless they maximize the profit of the company and maximize shareholder value. And the only way, exactly, the only way, and we know this from the Facebook papers. It's very explicit inside these companies when they know there's going to be a risk to public safety or human rights and a trade-off for shareholder value. Every time it's an easy answer for them, they're going to prioritize shareholder value and profit. We have the evidence could not be clearer for that. And, we should not be taken for a ride by their glossy PR campaigns. They like to tell us they exist to connect the world and to make our lives easier. And they're very adept at selling that story by pumping enormous amounts of money into those marketing campaigns. But at the most basic level, they are incentivized to always choose profit over public safety and respect for human rights. And unless we see the regulations which force them to do otherwise, they're going to keep doing that every single time.
The question that kind of just came into my mind, and again, I don't want to get political, but again, I don't think it has anything to do with politics, but surely by now the politicians in power should have seen this. I mean, I can understand, we say 15 years ago, people didn't understand tech very much and so on. I mean, I remember like 15 years ago, people still didn't know how the internet works. So it's like, I appreciate that it was, and again, I think this is the failure of the tech sector not communicating openly with the public. I mean, that's something that I was complaining about at the time as well. But surely right now, they understand, they could see what's going on. There's plenty of research, not just by Amnesty, but many other organizations, universities, it's endless research. Yet they're not changing. Now, I know, they're lobbyists, but they would know that lobbyists from Google, for instance, or Microsoft are way more financially resourced than, say, Amnesty. Yet they're not changing. Oh, yet the lobbyists still have direct access to politicians regardless of the party. And I'm thinking, so why? I mean, are they in the pocket? I mean, I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but it's like some people would say, well, maybe they're in the pockets of these big tech. Perhaps not. I don't know. But I just think by now, surely the politicians should see this coming. I mean, why aren't they doing anything, or what's going on?
I mean, you would hope so, but I think we need to also recognize the place of these companies in the global economy. These aren't just technology companies; these are the biggest corporations in the world.
Yeah,
and they have immense influence over politics as a result. Big business has always had a big influence in politics, and that doesn't require any kind of corruption. I mean, depending on your definition, but it can be all completely legal. But with the amount of economic weight, any one of these companies has a kind of value that's bigger than most countries' economies. So they can easily kind of indirectly or directly threaten to kind of pull out of a country, to shut down their services in a country. And politicians will be scared. They'll be scared that their voters are now going to be without these essential services. They've developed these kind of market positions where they are actually essential providers of public goods and services. And they have the power to withdraw as soon as they're threatened with regulation, with accountability. They can say, well, we're going to get out of here. And then, good luck to you getting reelected by your people if they suddenly don't have Facebook, and that's where they communicate with all their friends. And we actually saw this recently in Nigeria, for example, in a very progressive move. The Nigerian Data Protection Authority and its competition regulator came together to issue a decision against Meta for exploitative data extraction practices and abusing its market dominance in the country. And it issued a very progressive and welcome decision from a human rights perspective. And Meta immediately responded by saying they threatened to pull out of the country if this were to be enforced. And that's a major country, a huge country. But yeah, the power of Meta is still enough to stop or to really cause serious pause before enforcement of those laws. So we see this huge asymmetry of power because they've simply been able to grow so huge, so powerful that they can destabilize economies at the drop of a hat. And that's a scary place for politicians to be, but it's an even scarier place for our societies to be.
Because they've really deeply integrated that technology in people's lives to an extent that there's such a major dependency that without it, I mean, like, because you mentioned in Nigeria, but mostly in African countries, South American countries, Facebook is literally their internet. So they might not have access to anything beyond Facebook. You take Facebook away and they become completely disconnected. That's how powerful it is, isn't it? Wow.
Exactly. And we documented this at length in a research investigation we did on Meta's role in the Rohingya atrocities, the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya in Myanmar back in 2017. And very much that was the position there. It really was seen as the internet, and Facebook established that dominance very intentionally by rolling out these free internet access programs that were effectively like a way to on-ramp the entire population onto Facebook as the primary conduit to the internet. And then we saw these horrific atrocities perpetrated and facilitated by Facebook with the platform playing a central role because of that monopoly it effectively held in the internet space there. So I think it's a really critical point when we're also thinking through solutions. We're talking about regulation and what good might look like and what changes we might need to see. At this stage, these regulations are unlikely to be effective. I mean, regulations over the business model. I mean, regulation over algorithms, unless we also look to the market power and actually break up some of these monopolies and break up these enormous companies, because that, I think, is one of the key reasons why we're not seeing the obvious regulatory measures that should be enacted, because they're too big to fail almost. And that size, that market dominance needs to be addressed and tackled decisively as well. And that's another area where I do hold some hope, because we have seen movement, particularly in the US and the EU, around antitrust competition investigations. And there was a decision recently in the US around Google. We're awaiting kind of the remedy there. Definitely, this is an important part of the overall kind of toolkit when we're thinking about solutions to some of these problems.
Although I have to say I'm a bit doubtful about the American development with Trump. I mean, he can easily reverse it. So yeah, it will be interesting to see. But I kind of lost hope in the American legal system right now, which is really sad to see.
As an entrepreneur, I like to follow the news really, really closely, be it in politics, the environment, health, fitness, and of course AI, which is my field of work. But the problem with the news sector today is that staying up to date with events around the world can be really, really difficult, because it's impossible to consult a single source for the full story. The narratives that shape public opinion often just reinforce media and corporate-backed vested interest, and of course they push for whatever public or political biases of their readers. Not to mention, of course, they push a lot of clickbait stories to just attract clicks rather than trying to inform you properly. And this is why I fell in love with Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that combines news from around the world in one place, so you can compare coverage. For every news source, you can see if they have political bias, how reliable their reporting is, and who owns them. And they've got this amazing tool called the blind spot feed, which highlights news disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. I even see this with AI. For example, you'll see the left-leaning AI coverage tend to be kind of very doom and gloom, But then on the other side, of the right-leaning, AI is the savior of humanity and everything. I mean, it's quite ridiculous in both cases. So it's so important to have a tool like Blindspot because it shows you the balance of this coverage so that you can actually see what the real story is, what's the crux of the story, which is super important, especially for somebody like me, because many customers around the world rely on me and my team to make sure that we inform them about AI and technology as accurately as we possibly can. But even for me personally, as somebody that likes to follow all the other stories, I want to make sure that my cognitive bias is in check. So check out this tool, it's absolutely phenomenal. You can subscribe through my link at ceoretort.com/ground news, one word, or scan the QR code that you can see on the screen right now if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, and you'll get 40% of their Vantage plan. It's the one that I use to get unlimited access to every single feature and tool that they have, and it works out less than $5 a month. It's basically like a cup of coffee a month. And your subscription not only helps our channel and our podcast, but it also supports Ground News as it makes the media landscape more transparent. They're not reliant on VCs, kind of like my company. They are absolutely 100% funded by their membership. So this is something that I really, really love about them as well. It's their level of independence. And I think we should all support companies like that to make sure that we stay informed as accurately as we possibly can. So check out the link at ceoretort.com/ground news, one word, or scan the QR code that you can see on the screen right now if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, and you'll get 40% of their Vantage plan. And tell me what you think. Do you like it? Is it working for you? I would love to get your feedback. So thank you, Ground News, for supporting this video.
And that brings us back to X, talking of atrocities, because this is, another example that's pretty horrific. And again, I put the link to the report in the description for the listeners, and we republished the press release from Amnesty on the CEO Retort Journal as well, so just make sure that it's out there, because, and I'll come back to that afterwards, that I feel like the media did not report this. I did not hear about this research because unless one of my followers actually emailed it to me and said, "Hey Tim, did you see this?" I'm like, "I haven't seen this." It's like nobody reported this. Like, what the hell is going on? But can you explain for the listeners, because we have a lot of international listeners that are not aware, or maybe not fully aware, that there were major far-right riots in the UK last year. And your research found that X played a massive role in that. So could you explain the background and the context of it, and how did you then find these details?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think first of all, it's important to recognize the very tragic context in which these riots erupted. So there was a triple murder of 3 young girls in the town of Southport in England in late July last year. And after that, misinformation very quickly began to spread on social media. Claims that the attacker was an asylum seeker who arrived by boat and he was a Muslim were extremely prominent. And before any official narrative emerged or police information, these claims, which turned out to be patently false, none of those details were true, had gone viral and spread like wildfire across a range of social media platforms, but X was especially prominent. And in the days that followed, like major kind of figures associated with the right, including the likes of Andrew Tate and Tommy Robinson in the UK, and Elon Musk himself, were very much inserting themselves in the conversation and amplifying those false claims and narratives that almost overnight were fueling offline violence. So in multiple locations across the UK, in Belfast, in Rotherham, in Southport, in Middlesbrough, and elsewhere, there was an eruption of far-right violence. So mobs organized themselves and started to attack asylum seeker accommodations and to harass people of color, people who are perceived to be Muslim or from an immigrant background. And it was really horrific, chaotic scenes that instilled fear into kind of Muslim and migrant communities across the UK. Some of the worst kind of eruption of racist organizing and violence that the country had seen for many years. And we at the time were monitoring that. We were responding to the situation. We were calling for social media platforms to enact emergency measures to try and stop the spread of false and harmful content. And marking the 1 year anniversary of the riots last week, we published this new investigation. And this is, it was quite clear to most observers that there was, the social media had played a very prominent role, that X had played a prominent role. But we wanted to try and prove that. We wanted to look under the hood, look at the tech, and ask, what about X's design and policy choices may have contributed to the spread of this misinformation? So we undertook a technical analysis of X's recommender algorithm. So all of the publicly available source code we could find, and really analyzed it from a human rights perspective to really understand what makes certain content go viral and why. And what we found were systematic design choices that favored kind of contentious engagement, let's say, so kind of argument and controversial content to spread at speed. This is a business model in the broadest terms that's shared by a lot of social media companies. But we were able to see that it's particularly prominent here on X. And we combined that analysis with a review of all of the policy choices enacted over the past couple of years. So since Elon Musk's takeover in 2022, he has undertaken a lot of measures to change how the company works and how the platform works. That has included firing most of the trust and safety team who's responsible for stopping the spread of harmful content, many of their content moderators who are there to spot that content and take action whenever they do see it. He changed the speech policies to enable and allow more abusive and harmful kind of threatening speech where that would have been previously prohibited. And also he reinstated accounts that had previously been banned for hate speech, including Andrew Tate and Tommy Robinson. So when we looked at this in totality, we were able to see that this combination of kind of design, the algorithmic design of the platform and these policy choices really created this perfect storm for the amplification and spread like wildfire of harmful, racist misinformation. And that enabled X to play such a prominent role in the wake of the Southport attacks and in the riots that ensued.
That's terrible. I mean, it just shows again. I mean, the point not just me, but many people involved in tech, from the development perspective and engineering, that I say to people that it is so easy to manipulate a lot of these algorithms. People don't realize how easy it is. They think that, especially if you have AI and AI recommendation systems, it's like, it's really hard. Sometimes some of these companies, they try to say, look, it's so hard for us to change it, etc. I'm like, actually, it's not hard. I mean, like, you don't necessarily see the results immediately. It kind of takes time to propagate, but to change it, to actually manipulate it, it's really, really easy. If you have access to the code, if you're the boss, you're the chief developer or whatever, it can be easily manipulated. And I think this is really, pretty disturbing evidence for that. But to go back, because one of the arguments that you hear that Elon Musk made these changes because he did not believe in banning people like Andrew Tate and obviously Donald Trump himself was banned on Twitter before it turned into X. But it's all to do with freedom of speech, which is, of course, they kind of conflate human rights aspect of freedom of speech with this sort of behavior. So again, to put this to bed, is this freedom of speech?
Thank you for that question, because it is plaguing these conversations at the moment. There are a lot of people who claim to be defenders and protectors of free speech who are enacting very severe harms and very politicized agendas under the guise of free speech. But
yes,
to be absolutely clear, from an international human rights perspective, based on human rights law, and that is what matters when we're talking about freedom of speech, all human rights must be balanced. There is no such thing as absolute freedom of speech. We do not have a right to abuse, harass, harm, and incite violence against anyone that we choose to, because they also have protections under international human rights law and standards. And therefore, all rights are qualified. There's no such thing as absolute freedom of speech. And in order for freedom of speech to be enabled for everyone, for a migrant or a Muslim to have their freedom of speech protected and respected, they also need to be protected from this kind of harmful, abusive, harassing behavior and materials. And companies, social media companies in particular, have a responsibility to ensure that appropriate balance is struck. And with these changes that Elon Musk has initiated, he's turned very far away from that approach, that appropriate approach to freedom of speech. And on that point, I also want to add something, because soon after Musk's takeover, we allude to this in the research, they announced a new policy of freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. And in theory, this sounded potentially interesting, that they would allow content to remain on the platform even if it was harmful, but they would ensure it would not be amplified. Now, it's an interesting proposition from a human rights perspective, because arguably it goes towards finding that balance. But what we found in this case is that it absolutely did not transpire. And when we looked at the algorithm, actually, we could not find any evidence that there are any tools within it to assess the potential for harm of a piece of content before making it go viral. All they're looking at is whether it is likely to fuel engagement.
Yes.
So actually, what was said publicly about the policy and what was under the hood of the algorithm do not match up. And this was borne out in reality. We saw hateful misinformation, racist hate speech from prominent far-right figures and from less prominent accounts going viral, spreading like wildfire, and clearly being algorithmically amplified. So whatever alleged safeguards exist, we could find no evidence of them, and they didn't have much, if any, impact in practice.
So how would you police that? Because I get into sort of arguments on LinkedIn when people try to tell me that, this is all freedom of speech. I should not be attacking people like that. Or not that I'm attacking, but I'm saying, for example, you also see that with some of the large podcasters, that they bring guests that are very controversial, that you know for a fact that they're lying through their teeth. They're spreading very dangerous misinformation. But the podcasters like to use the excuse that, we want to offer everybody the opportunity to voice their opinion. And the analogy I like to use, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong with that, but my analogy, sort of comparing this to the freedom of enterprise, meaning that anybody has the freedom to start a company, right? You don't have to be of a particular class or whatever. Anybody can start a business, anybody can start a company. But once you decide to turn that company into a scam, you get arrested because it's a scam. Scam is illegal. And to me, as somebody that actually, I have lived in different countries and I have lived in dictatorships. I'm lucky I'm not from these countries. I could just get out. But I have seen what not having freedom of speech does to societies. It's a horrible experience. And to me, I call myself freedom of speech absolutist in the sense that it needs to be protected and not abused. And when I see people using the term, it's okay for me to be racist, or it's okay for people to attack women online and threaten them with rape, etc., because that's freedom of speech. No, it's not freedom of speech. And to me, this is it's should be as equivalent as somebody building a scammy business. And in the world of business, you get arrested and you get prosecuted. But why doesn't that happen in this case? Because I would have thought that surely if somebody spreads that kind of dangerous misinformation, they should be prosecuted, no?
Yeah, and I think this brings us back to some of our earlier conversation about this regulatory vacuum, because freedom of speech is not a subjective question. There are international legal standards that clearly define what freedom of expression looks like. What are the acceptable bounds of expression? What is crossing the line and should be prohibited or sanctioned versus what is allowable? They are very old standards. They're not new, but what is new is social media and its toxic business model. So what we ideally would need to see is that those objective standards are baked into oversight mechanisms so that these algorithms can be subject to, for example, audits, that there's transparency associated with them, and that they can be tested and red teamed for potential for harm. And that would enable regulatory oversight, not on each piece of content, because I'm very sympathetic to the argument that we need to protect freedom of speech. And I'm wary of saying individual pieces of content need to be taken down. I think that is the wrong approach to deal with harmful speech online. We're never going to catch up with every harmful post. It's a game of whack-a-mole that we're destined to lose. What we can address is a business model that makes the worst content go viral.
Yes.
And that's why we see these harms. It's not that someone's allowed to post something harmful in the first place from their living room to their 5 friends. It's the fact that that might go viral and be shown in millions and millions of news feeds and contribute to racist violence on the street the next day. But there, we're seeing the work of the algorithms and the business model. And that is something that we can address without impinging upon free speech. And those are the kind of systemic regulatory approaches that we need to see.
No, that makes a lot of sense, because we have a debate in the UK, again, for the international listeners that might not be aware, because during these riots, some people, the police investigated a few users on Twitter who instigated the violence, and they actually found enough evidence to arrest them and put them in prison. And again, their supporters, again, mostly on the right, saying that this is infringement of their freedom of speech, and that, Starmer and the UK government are basically trying to silence people, etc., etc. It's kind of ironic that they're not saying the same thing about Trump, who seems to be doing the same, but on the other side. But that's a different debate, I guess. But I mean, what's your opinion? I mean, is there, or the legal basis of what the police have done with some of the users in the UK in relation to that riot? Was it right? Was it correct that they prosecuted them based on the laws that you highlighted?
We actually have not analyzed the specific individual cases, so I can't really speak to their validity or whether they were fair or proportionate on an individual basis. But I can say, in general terms, under international human rights law, there are thresholds that if you go beyond them, they are subject to prosecution and criminalization. And that is, for example, we are directly inciting violence against people. That is a crime in most jurisdictions, and it is reasonable that people are investigated if they're found to have actually incited violence against someone, regardless of whether they did it with a megaphone or with a social media account. That should be subject to investigation and prosecution. But I do think that in terms of the big picture, that a criminal justice oriented approach to this in isolation is missing the point, because again, it's another kind of manifestation of that whack-a-mole approach. You're dealing with the symptoms rather than the root cause. And we would really urge governments to really look at what is making this content go viral. It's not happening organically. It's happening because of the business models of these companies. That's what we need to tackle. I'm not saying there's no role for criminal law. There certainly is in certain circumstances, but we're really urging governments to look at those root causes of the social media harms.
So how bad is it? Because obviously you had access to the actual algorithms, the recommendation systems from the open source codes that you managed to find. Now, I don't know. I mean, I don't believe Facebook has the same, or Instagram. I don't believe they do. But is that similar? I mean, can you compare? Are they all as bad as each other, or is X particularly a lot worse than, say, Facebook and Instagram? Because I'm already thinking about the defenders, people who are defending Elon Musk and so on. They might say that, well, actually, it's not Elon Musk that is responsible. Twitter was always a controversial space. There's a lot of misinformation on Twitter way before Elon Musk took over. There's a lot of misinformation, of course, like we've seen in 2016, especially on Facebook. That, of course, that was manipulated and enhanced by the likes of Cambridge Analytica, etc. So just out of interest, I mean, from what you've seen, is there comparable data or outcomes that you've seen from your research, across all platforms, or is X particularly the worst?
Yeah, I think that's a really key question, and I'm glad you asked, because within my team, within Amnesty Tech, we've been investigating a range of tech companies and platforms, and we've never taken the view that one is necessarily worse than the other. What we have established is that Meta, Google, TikTok, X, they all share this very similar business model, which prioritizes engagement above all else. So the entire social media ecosystem has been defined by this race to the bottom, really, about who can create the most engaging algorithms that will addict people the most. And time and time again, we've seen that leads to the spread of harmful content. I think, we've investigations have shown Meta's direct contribution to, as I mentioned, the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya people in Myanmar, also its contribution to the civil war in Ethiopia, where, tens of thousands of people were also killed. And, we've also had investigations on the TikTok algorithm, which showed that it systematically is promoting harmful mental health related content to young people and children on a massive, massive scale. So none of these companies should be exonerated. I think Elon Musk has kind of personified in very dramatic fashion, because he's such a prominent public figure, and he has very controversial political views which he likes to express. He's personified these trends, but in fact they exist across a number of companies. And also Twitter was no perfect place. Amnesty had put out reports in 2018, again in 2020, highlighting how widespread harmful and abusive content was on the platform. So for sure, this is not just an Elon Musk problem. I think it's a big tech problem, and it was also a Twitter problem before it was an X problem. But one thing I will say is that Elon Musk has been very overt and deliberate about seeking to strip away safeguards that did exist, and that is something that deserves attention and critique, because it's a kind of doubling down on the harms rather than seeking to address them. But I will also add to that is that he is not alone. Meta announced a lot of changes, policy changes around the time of the second Trump inauguration, when it was a very strategic choice to curry favor with the new administration. They've got rid of their fact-checking program in the US and potentially globally. And they've made a number of other changes, which are similarly a turning away from responsibility, and really a turn towards recklessness in the pursuit of profit. So definitely not just X, many of them engaging in similar behaviors.
No, I mean, that's a great point. And I think because my concern, because you kind of do see that a lot in Europe, like sometimes they get fixated on one individual or one company, and they say, okay, Elon Musk is the problem. We stop him, we ban X, everything will be fine. But again, like those of us involved in tech for a long time, I've been saying same thing in Google Campus, especially with the recommendation systems. It doesn't really matter who does it. If you use recommendation systems to recommend content, you're not going to recommend the good content or bad content. You're going to recommend content that engages the most, no matter what. And because I built a lot of these things myself, even before, like in early 2000s. I mean, that's how they work. There's no intelligence in these things. So that's why I worry a lot, because like you see a lot of talk about Elon Musk and X and Elon Musk, and I'm not seeing enough coverage or critique of Meta. I mean, like, apart from, soon after the inauguration, when they announced that they want to get rid of their fact checkers as well, and they want to get rid of their DEI policy, and that infamous silly statement from Zuckerberg that he wants to be more masculine or whatever the hell that means. But really, you don't see much coverage in the media in terms of the harms caused by TikTok compared to X, or, Instagram compared to X. It's like, again, I feel like the media need to be regulated themselves to actually start to provide more balanced reporting on this thing. Because like, if you ask any person right now, they would say to you, oh, no, not everything is, it's X and Elon Musk. But Meta, it's all right. But it's not, is it? They're pretty much dangerous, all of them.
I would agree that there are dangers baked into all of them. Absolutely. I have a slightly more optimistic take when it comes to public perceptions. Maybe I live in a bit of a bubble, but I do feel, based on conversations that I have, whether it's with, extended family members who wouldn't really be tapped into these conversations, I do feel there's a growing awareness of the harms associated with social media in general. And that's around a lot of understanding about kind of children and kind of kids growing up with this tech, and in schools, etc. Those conversations are becoming more and more prominent, and I think they cut across platforms, actually, because for a lot of kids it would be TikTok is the main concern, and so I'm hopeful that people are becoming an appropriate level of pissed off and are getting ready to demand some of the changes we need.
And I think it's important that, I mean, actually, because you mentioned children, I did have an episode with a global campaigner and an expert in this area, specifically Professor Sarah Grimes. So her entire research is about how algorithms impact children's safety and mental health across all platforms. And she actually found that, none of the algorithms on any platform has the ability to protect children, because they don't even have the ability to recognize a child online. The algorithms just haven't got that ability. They can recognize a man and a woman, but not the child. Because the way it's to do with the way how children behave online. Because people think, of children like the little innocent little creatures, right, running in the streets. But online, they behave very, very differently. They swear more, etc. But they still don't behave like adults. And that just confuses the shit out of the algorithms. The algorithms are like, okay, we have no idea what this thing is. It's a creature of some kind. Okay, just recommend whatever content that works, that engages. So there are experts out there that they are highlighting this. And it's the reason why, again, I try to get all of you guys out of the shadows, because to me, it feels that the media put you in the shadows. Because going back to your research, I mean, has any of the media outlets interviewed you about it enough? Because I haven't seen much of that coverage, and it was a huge story a year ago. Yet you would think, okay, surely on the anniversary of this horrible murders, your report should be pretty much at the front and center of the reporting to say, hey, look, these riots happened. The people who organized these riots, they took advantage of these murders. They don't care about the children. They don't care about their families. All they care about is how can we campaign and actually use that to our advantage to start causing trouble. And the media said nothing. And I'm thinking, this is what? I mean, I could be wrong. Please tell me, did any major media outlet interview you recently about this report?
Yeah, I mean, we got some decent coverage, I would say. I always hope for more and to be, front page of all the big outlets, but that's generally not how it works. And the news cycle is so busy and there's always so much going on. But we did get good coverage in, say, The Independent, The Mirror, some big British outlets like that. We also have interest from some government authorities that they picked up and they want to meet with us and discuss our recommendations. So that's also a positive. And I think, via social media, Amnesty UK, our partner in this work, who they've been putting out a lot of social kind of content, interviews with kind of survivors or people who were impacted by the riots, that have been generating a lot of interest and conversation online. And so I do think it's getting out there, but yeah, I wish more people were aware as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that you said that some government policymakers are contacting you. To me, that's important because, I mean, at the end of the day, they're the ones who have the power to make some changes, hopefully, somehow. Because the reason I asked this, because again, there's another story that I'm sure you're aware of. And actually, when we recorded, as we were recording this, we already had an episode with Emma Monk. So we started this misinformation watch. And basically, the biggest story that's been going on that she debunked, from top to bottom, it's this whole fear of, oh my God, the UK is under attack by immigrants, and there's more illegal migrants than legal migrants. And it's all complete nonsense. It's all wrong, and she has proven it. So if you guys believe that, check out that episode. But the thing that really angered me, that again, they're the same forces that incited the riots, been going on for the past year since that riot. They're saying, oh, because we didn't know the ethnicity of the suspect, that's why we had to ask questions. That's why people went rioting, because they didn't know what is the true identity, or rather ethnicity, of the suspect. Now, today, the government, the UK government, announced that they're actually considering, I don't know if they're considering it or they actually want to do that. They actually from now on want the suspects to be identified and revealed, or rather the ethnicity to be identified and revealed. And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, basically, firstly, you're capitulating to the far right, which is, to me, stupid. Secondly, surely we're talking about a suspect, not a convict. So human rights? Anyone? I mean, what's your opinion on that? Because I'm thinking this is crazy.
Yeah, I do find,
gentlemen.
this is, I mean, it's a really tricky area, right? Because this is out. I should preface this by saying this is outside my ballpark of kind of
Fair enough.
human rights expertise. But I would say that I do think it's a tricky position for police and law enforcement authorities to be in, because I think based on what happened at Southport and this misinformation about the identity and ethnicity and religion of the attacker going viral, it really spooked the authorities. They were like left to kind of trying to chase and clean up behind what was just such a rapidly developing situation fueled by the online space. And I don't know if you recall, if you're aware, there was this attack that happened at the Liverpool FC kind of trophy parade, where
yes.
A driver like plowed his car into the crowd. And at that moment, the police decided to release information about the suspect and said that it was a white male from the local area.
Yeah, I remember. I was laughing at that. They couldn't wait. It's like, he's a white guy. He's a white guy. Please don't write. Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't be laughing. It's sad, but it's just ridiculous. Yeah. It is.
But I completely sympathize with why they had that instinct, because they saw what happened after Southport and they didn't want this to get out of hand. But it's a very risky game to play, because if you're, once you start naming the ethnicity of one suspect, you might have to do it for the next, and it might not be in your interest to do so. It might inflame tensions worse. So I think it creates a precedent that's going to be very tricky for the authorities to deal with. I mean, I don't think there's an easy solution in that regard. I don't have an amnesty line on it. But I do kind of appreciate how complex it is. But again, it's just one where I think, yes, these are decisions that need to be made in the moment, but also we're going to keep being faced with these very tough decisions unless we deal with the root cause of this social media misinformation viral.
Yeah, because in fact, we're seeing for the first time in history, because before recent years, people would think, okay, whatever happens on social media tends to stay on social media. Well, actually, what we're seeing now, it's seeping through into the real life, which is dangerous. We're hoping that would be the other way around. Like, the real life would start seeping into social media and clean it up, as you said. They are the root problem, the root cause to the problem. And I should actually say, just for the record, that there's actually before we started recording, I saw that there was a report that one of the families of the murdered girls, south from BB King, they say they are completely against this idea of identifying the ethnicity of any suspect. I mean, if they, I suppose they don't want this to be done under their name. So, please don't do us any favors. We don't agree with this because it's wrong. So I think it's important to highlight that the family of one of the victims are absolutely against this idea, which kind of shows, like I said, it's such a tricky area. It's sad. But I mean, I know, because we need to kind of finish very soon. But part of the tradition of this podcast, I always like to ask the background story of all of the guests, because the thing I never planned this, but when you get out and get your neck out there on social media, start getting all sorts of different followers, and we are getting more and more young graduates, young entrepreneurs. People who, they've got their qualifications, finished school, etc. And they're like, yeah, but we don't really know where to go. It's like as if their education and whatever they've done thus far, it wasn't out of choice necessarily, but because, okay, we were told we need to do GCSEs, we were told we need to have A levels, etc. But they always ask the question, how do you start the journey that leads you to where you are? Did you always know that you wanted to be a human rights lawyer or work for Amnesty? My general message for people is, look, follow your passion, and you will see how the road takes you into the right direction. Because if you're passionate about something, you become very, very good at it. It's like that's undoubtable. But what is your story? How did you get into the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I'd say, first of all, I think that's great advice. Follow your passion, stick to it. But it's also possible to have multiple passions. And I think that was me. I think when I was a kid, I was in school, I was always obsessed with the ocean. with fish, with dolphins, with whales. I wanted to be a marine biologist. That was my dream. I used to watch David Attenborough on TV.
Actually, me too. Me too.
Really?
I love the sea. I love the sea. Yeah, I would love to be a marine biologist.
Yeah,
one day
somehow
maybe.
we ended up talking to each other on this podcast.
Yeah,
with no scuba mask. But that was my dream. But I think, you know, my mother was like a bit more traditionally minded, and she convinced me that I might not be David Attenborough. If I take that route, I might end up in a lab, you know, dissecting dead creatures, and I wouldn't love it as much. So I also loved, you know, reading, writing, debating. So law seemed like a natural choice. I didn't really have a clear goal when I went into it, but I was drawn to social justice, kind of that area of work, kind of the political side of the law. And honestly, in the early days of my law degree, I found it so boring. Some of it was all like private law, law of contract, property law, corporate law, these kind of things. I just found myself glazing over in the eyes. But then when I started having access to like human rights courses, and that piqued my interest. I thought this could actually be, you know, something really meaningful to do out in the world. And yeah, I kind of took it from there. I started to do a couple of internships, and then one of them, once I graduated, I went out to Cambodia to do an internship with the UN at their tribunal to prosecute the Khmer Rouge, surviving leaders of the Khmer Rouge. And I spent 6 months there. I really got to, you know, I really got a passion for the work, but I wanted to do more grassroots human rights work. So from there, I wasn't really into working in international courts. I found it a bit too bureaucratic and a bit too stuffy and a bit too slow, the whole process. I really wanted to work with activists and close to the issues as they were happening. And from there, I ended up working with a local Cambodian human rights organization, like the Cambodian Center for Human Rights, where I stayed for quite a number of years. And that really is what solidified my path in this direction, working on human rights in general. And I stayed in the region for about 7 years. And eventually that took me towards tech and human rights, which was really just an emerging area within Amnesty and in the human rights space, increasingly growing at the time. But I was covering Cambodia and Vietnam for Amnesty when we started getting a lot of complaints and reports from human rights defenders in Vietnam in particular who said they were being censored on social media. And Vietnam is like similar story to kind of the Arab Spring in the sense that it was a great hope for a lot of people in a context that was very repressive in terms of media. So people really flocked to Facebook, to YouTube to express themselves. But then after a couple of years of this like hope growing, the government and the company the government started arresting people for their online expression, but the company started removing content and deleting accounts of human rights defenders. So that was the genesis of a big research investigation we then did on Meta and Google's role in censoring human rights activists in Vietnam. And that was really what drew me into this world. And it was my first kind of direct taste of seeing up close that these companies, when faced with a choice of respecting human rights or maintaining profit, in this case by ensuring continued market access in a very lucrative market, they will choose profit. And that was, I was kind of hooked from that time onwards. It was about the same time as the Cambridge Analytica scandal, yes. Around the same time as like elections of populist and far right leaders around the world, you know, in Brazil, Philippines, the US, elsewhere, the Brexit referendum. It was clear that social media was playing a big role in these things. And I really began to believe that tech accountability, social media platform accountability was just central to all human rights struggles and would only become increasingly so. And that kind of led me to pivot into my work today with Amnesty Tech.
So again, it shows that it's multiple hoops that you had to kind of go through. So it's not something that you kind of planned ahead.
Yeah, not at all. No, I was just making it up as I went along.
Yeah, well, that's that. I tell everybody, like, if you look at every single guest I had so far, it's exactly the same. Nobody said to me, Tim, I actually, all of that is part of a plan. All of this is like, it was all, meticulously planned for God knows blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, bullshit. Of course not. That's why I always laugh when I see some of the productivity gurus and, business gurus that say, oh, you need to have a plan. And I even heard somebody recently, I can't remember who it was, but one of the business gurus that say, oh, no, forget passion. It's about what makes you the money. I'm like, but I mean, if you're not passionate about something, you're not going to be good at it. Like, believe me, I tried. Like yourself. I had a traditional mother, like, oh, medical science. I wanted to do computer science. That's my passion. Tech has always been my passion. But I did biomedical science. Ironically, I discovered AI through biomedical science. So I suppose maybe I was lucky. But I hated it. I mean, the science is amazing. I learned a lot about the human body and all of that stuff, which is cool. But the work in the lab and stuff, I'm like, that's just not me. I hated it. I hated every moment of it. Yet, when I did my second degree in computer science, it was really hard because normally, when you do a master's degree in computer science, you're supposed to have a degree in maths or a computer science or anything relevant. Mine was totally irrelevant. But they gave me the chance anyway because I was very good. My grades in my A-level maths were really, really high, like sort of A stars and so on. So they're like, okay, you've got something there. Oh, look, my parents forced me to do it, so give me a chance, and they did. So I'm forever grateful. Shout out to De Montfort. And man, it was hard. I don't know how many sleepless months, like sleepless months, like sleepless nights, right? Yet I loved every single moment of it, and I killed it. I was like, I don't know, a few points behind, like almost to a distinction level. My project was A star, right? And stuff like, I don't like, there you go. That's passion. Because I was so passionate about it. I worked my ass off, and it didn't matter that I didn't sleep. It didn't matter that I lost my hair at the time. All of that, it's like, but I loved it. And I think that's the key. Absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
But, I just want to say thank you. For your work, and if people want to follow your work, where can they go?
So you can find Amnesty Tech. I'm going to say it. It's ironic. It's controversial on X. You can also find us across all social media platforms. Amnesty International in general. Amnesty Tech. We have our own account on X, but if you look on LinkedIn, if you look on Instagram, you'll find Amnesty everywhere across all those platforms. And depending on what country you're based in, you probably do have a local Amnesty section. So a national office. If you're in the UK, we have Amnesty UK. They have their own website. You can go on there and find out more information about all our research, our work, and how to get involved and support our campaigns. And the same applies for most countries in the world where we have national presences. So yeah, please do reach out if you're interested. And thanks to you, Tim, for having me on for this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, to say that publicly, that, regardless of what the media says, you guys have a space here. So if there's anything new and you want to come on to talk about it and discuss it, you're very, very welcome. Just let me know. You'll jump the queue, right? Because I know you have a unit involved in AI as well. So if there's any major development or research, I mean, I'm keeping an eye on what the work that you do. But yeah, you guys are very, very welcome here. This is a space for you. That's the whole point of what I'm trying to do here, is to bring as many experts as yourselves, as I said, out of the shadows. If the world is ignoring you, I'll make sure I'm not going to ignore you, and your voice will be out there. So you're always, always welcome here.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. And yeah, would love to come back someday.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, my friends, this is it. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, before I go away, if you are on YouTube, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button below. It really makes a massive difference for the growth of our channel. And if you're following us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you need to give us a star review. Apparently, your following means nothing unless you give us a star review. Don't ask me why, but give us whatever star review that you think is fair. And if you're not following us, what are you doing? Come on, man. It doesn't cost you anything. It really makes a big difference. I really, really appreciate your support. But also, if you've got cash to spare, consider to become a founding member. We are an independent medium. We're not reliant on any kind of company that gets money from Russian oligarchs or any kind of weird sponsorships or anything like that. All of the companies that work with us are genuine companies that I know and I like. But ultimately, it's the members, you guys, our subscribers, our followers, our founding members, or those of you who actually just donated us like $1 here, a couple of bucks there, $5 there. All of that makes a big difference. This is what makes us truly independent. We're not chasing clickbait because we don't want clickbaits. We want facts. We want the truth. We want something that we can all aspire to, and something that truly make us at least work harder to make the world a better place. Not just talk about it, but actually make it happen. And of course, it supports all of our campaigns as well. So my friends, thank Thank you so much. Much love. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
You are listening to Z.